I was originally gonna title this talk "How to Fight a Religious War," but it occurs to me that you have to sort of accept that you're in a religious war before you talk about how to fight one. And I would suggest to you today that we are in the middle of a religious war. And if that sounds, as shocking as Jeremy saying that maybe persecution of whites sounds shocking, I would suggest to you that it's not. For as great as the talk was with Doug Wilson and Dr. Moeller, and I do think that they get it, but part of this is a category problem. They kept talking about secular liberalism and woke leftists and sort of like even the illiberal left, right? We have to understand that it's not quite right to call them secular leftists, like they just don't believe in anything. They have their own religion, and they're waging a religious war against us, against the Christian side. And you don't even have to be Christian to be on the Christian side. You just have to be an American who believes in the founding principles of this country. And that might strike some people as odd to say we're in a religious war and there's two warring religions here, because we're supposed to be this, America's supposed to be a country that has separation of church and state. We're not supposed to be a theocracy. We respect individual rights and free exercise of religion. And how could we be in the middle of a religious war? And this has been touched on in this panel and on the last session as well. The reason is because our country, like all countries, are based on theological and religious claims. We're used to talking about America as a propositional nation, right? And the phrase comes from Abraham Lincoln's famous line in the Gettysburg Address that America was dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. The idea of that proposition, that's different than the nation states, the ethnic nation states of Europe that were based on blood and soil and religion. We supposedly transcended all that and instead founded a country on an idea, a proposition, and anyone could become an American if they accept the proposition. And that's all true. But nearly everybody who says that America is a propositional nation is wrong about what the proposition is, right? We're not a collection of Enlightenment tropes. We're not a grab bag of ideas at the intersection of Locke and Rousseau. We're the creation of a Christian civilization, which is to say that the proposition at the heart of our country that undergirds our existence is Christianity and all that comes with it. That's the proposition. So without Christianity, you don't get free speech, you don't get liberty, you don't get equality, you don't get freedom of conscience, and you certainly don't get consent of the governed. So we need to be clear about that, like as our starting place, right? And some people will acknowledge that and will agree with that. And they'll say, yes, our inheritance as Americans is Christianity, but they'll insist that that's a point of departure. That once the American experiment was launched, we could safely separate the religion that launched it from the nation that now existed. And we could take the best parts of Christianity and kind of discard the actual religion. No need to continually affirm Christ. We've got Christless Christianity, and we're off to the races now. And you actually hear these arguments today, amazingly. It doesn't work like that. And somebody mentioned Richard Dawkins earlier. I'm glad they did. A few months ago, he gave this interview. He's the famous atheist, Richard Dawkins. He gave an interview to some media outlet, BBC or something, and he was lamenting how cultural Christianity seemed to be going away in England, and he sort of was flummoxed as to why we couldn't have cultural Christianity and discard sort of believing Christians. He wanted Christless Christianity. He wanted the culture without the cult. And he said, he loves these cathedrals and he loves Christmas carols and he wants to have more cultural Christians like him. And actually said in this interview that we need fewer believing Christians. And it didn't seem to occur to him that that if there's nobody to pray in the cathedrals, if there's nobody to worship in these places of worship, then they're going to turn into apartment complexes, or in England's case, they're going to turn into mosques. If there's nobody who believes what is proclaimed in the Christmas carols, nobody's going to sing them. So again, you don't get the culture without the cult, and the spectacle of his own country should have been enough to convince him of that, but apparently it's not. So committed was he to this idea that I just mentioned earlier, that you could have kind of separate the religion, from the nation that it founds, and then just continue subsisting off the capital of this religion without ever replenishing it, without ever dipping into that well continually. It doesn't work. You can't do that. So that's the situation that we're in. We are living off of an inheritance that we've used up, and if we're not going to be a Christian country, we're not going to have a republic. The same that goes for England goes for America. Our proposition, right, that all men are created equal, it's a religious claim. It's specifically a Christian claim. And I don't want to belabor the point, but the reason we say all men are created equal is because we believe we're children of God, and we stand equal before the law because we stand equally before God. And if you get rid of that idea, if you say we don't need that theological underpinning, Dr. Muller talked about this. He used the word ontological a whole bunch of times, but this is what he's getting at. If you get rid of that, the whole system collapses. Because there's no justification for it. There's no justification for freedom of speech, or free exercise of religion, or consent of the governed, or limited government. They don't cohere. They make no sense at all. So what happens when you discard those ideas? I think what happens is what we're seeing happen right now. Something else comes in. Some other political order asserts itself. This idea that the individual person is somehow sacred and created in the image of God, that is only self-evident to a moral conscience that is formed and awakened by the teachings of Christianity. And I would say, as a Christian and a Catholic myself, teachings that come from Christ himself, right? So the American founding, that is to say, is not comprehensible in strictly secular or liberal or atheistic terms, right? Our nation begins with a proposition about the nature of God and man, and everything else flows from that. If that proposition is discarded or denied, then whatever comes after that isn't America. It might call itself America. It might even invoke a familiar vocabulary of rights and liberties, but it's not America. Thank you. So to bring this back to, so when I say we're engaged in a religious war, this is what I mean. And so who's on the other side of it? My book that came out a couple months ago argues that there's really only one alternative to Christianity, and and in the American context to a Christian nation, and that is a pagan society and a pagan America. If that strikes you as like a bit, what do you mean pagan? It kind of sounds crazy or maybe extreme. What I mean is simply the rejection of the proposition that all men are created equal. The inversion of the Christian claims that are at the heart of our country. That is to say, all men are not created equal. Some are slaves and some are masters, and society should be organized on that basis. That is the other side in this religious war. And part of our task right now, and part of the reason I wrote a whole book about it, is that I think people are having a hard time wrapping their minds around that. It's hard to accept that's what we're up against. It's hard to accept that we are moving into and really are in and have been for some time in a post-Christian era in the West. And what's rising up in the midst of this post-Christian era comes out of the past. It comes out of the pre-Christian era. And it posits a total inversion of the Christian worldview, a rejection of transcendent truth, a rejection of moral absolutes, a rejection of of reality itself, which are all in turn a rejection of the Christian God and the claims that Christendom has made down the ages. The post-Christian paganism I'm describing, it's not going to outwardly look like the paganism of the past. Not always. I mean, in some cases, it'll ape it, right? If you've seen, the explosion of interest in witchcraft, among young people, for example, or the way we talk about abortion now, quite pagan indeed. But even in cases where it doesn't look like, explicitly look like paganism as we popularly understand it, it'll be no less hostile to and incompatible with Christianity and with a nation organized around the claims of the Christian religion. It rejects those claims and posits, as I said, this inversion of them. And the political order that comes out of that is one that's not based on human liberty and rights. It's based on power and force and coercion. That's the political order that we're up against. In the religious war that we're fighting, that's the side that we're fighting, the side of coercion and force, the side that says you, the mass of people, are slaves, and they are to be ruled by an elect class of people who are naturally masters. And I don't have to spell out the ways to you all that we see this emerging in our time, and with our political class now. That's exactly what they believe. And part of, again, wrapping your heads around this is to accept the fact that if we reject the Christian foundation of America, then the people who run this country, the neo-pagan elite, how much do you think they care about your freedom of speech, or your ability to worship and have free exercise of your religion, or your freedom to associate in voluntary associations? They don't care about that at all. They have no reason to. The basis on which they would care about that has been totally rejected. It has no coherence. And in place of that, they're going to put in a system that's based on power. And they're the ones who have it. So, I don't mean to blackpill everybody, but we just had, in order to have any hope at all, you have to kind of accept the reality. You have to kind of I find that there's a relief in just accepting what is happening and being honest about it, right? We don't have to kid ourselves anymore. Late liberalism, this panel is called Surviving Late Liberalism. You can't survive late liberalism. You have to completely destroy it. So, which gets maybe to the last part, and then I'll stop talking. You guys can ask questions. The first place that we have to start to fight this is to shed this false notion that religion is this private matter, and that there's this wall of separation between our politics and our religion. And we have to agree and argue and proclaim without apology that public life in this country should be shaped by Christian morality and ordered by an adherence to its dictates, as it was for most of our civilization's history and as it was in the founding of this country as well. And most of all, we have to accept that our culture of self-government and liberty under law can't survive cut off from its source, which was and always will be the Christian faith. And without that faith, active and alive among the people, not just in theory, but in practice, there is no American republic. There won't be. And so if we want to save it, if we want to save the republic, we have to become a Christian nation once again. We have to convert our countrymen back to their native religion, if you will. And we have to win this religious war, because we're finding out now the stakes are as high as they can possibly be, and we know that there's more than one way for a nation to fall, right? There's the Roman way, which is a centuries-long decline of succumbing to wave upon wave of invaders. There's the British way, which we touched on earlier, which is a dwindling irrelevance and impotence in the face of in England's case, an assertive Muslim immigrant population. And then there's the American way, which is not to decline and fall. It's not to succumb to dwindle into irrelevance, but it's simply to become evil. So that's what we have to fight. Thank you.